At 2:41 a.m., a CCTV camera above a petrol station on the edge of a quiet English town flickers, skips a frame, then catches a woman stepping backward into the cone of white light, her hair stuck to her cheeks with rain, her phone clutched to her ear like it's the last solid thing in the world. And just before the footage freezes again, you can see her mouth form two words no one can hear, the kind of words you say when you realize you're not alone anymore, even though you were sure you were. The rain that night didn't fall in drops so much as it pressed down in sheets, flattening sound and softening edges, the kind of rain that makes footsteps vanish and blurs faces into smears of movement. And the petrol station's fluorescent lights hummed with a tired, insect-like buzz, attracting moths that beat themselves against the glass as if they were trying to get inside a safer world. While the road beyond lay empty in that eerie early morning. No traffic, no witnesses. Just the long stretch of wet tarmac reflecting the woman's shape back at her in a warped, trembling mirror, as if the ground itself was trying to remember her outline before it was gone. The night Lisa Hessian vanished, the air had that heavy, metallic smell rain gets when it's been falling too long, and people later swore they heard a scream somewhere between the ring road and the canal. But screams in towns like this get brushed off as foxes or drunk arguments. And Lisa was known for walking home late from the pub where she worked, because she said the long way helped her clear her head. The streetlights smearing orange puddles across the pavement as she crossed from one shadow to the next, her shoes leaving thin, dark commas behind her on the wet concrete, her phone lighting her face every few seconds with a message she kept typing and deleting, the last of which was never sent. Later, when people retraced her steps in daylight, the route looked harmless in that ordinary, almost boring way towns like this pride themselves on. The canal, bordered by weeds and rusted railings, the towpath marked with old gum stains and bicycle tracks, the terraced houses lined up like teeth in a tired smile. And it felt impossible that fear could live here, but night changes geography, turning short distances into long corridors of shadow, and every doorway into a place where someone could stand without being seen. Waiting for the moment, a single pair of footsteps becomes the only sound left in the world. Earlier that evening, Lisa had laughed too loud over nothing, the kind of laugh that tries to cover something cracking underneath. And her co-worker noticed she kept glancing toward the door like she was waiting for someone who didn't show, her hands trembling just enough to make the change rattle when she dropped coins into the till. And when she finally clocked out, she paused at the doorway, thumb hovering over her phone, then tucked it into her coat like she'd made a decision she didn't want to think about too hard, stepping into the rain without her umbrella. Even though she hated getting her hair wet, those who worked with her later admitted there had been a shift in her over the past few weeks. Nothing dramatic enough to raise alarms, just small fractures in routine. The way she'd started checking her phone more often, the way she'd flinch when it vibrated in her pocket, the way her smiles took longer to settle into place, like they were being assembled piece by piece. And no one wanted to be the person who read too much into it, because reading into things meant responsibility. And responsibility meant asking questions that might open doors no one felt ready to walk through. The route she took that night cut past the canal towpath, a narrow strip of black water that swallowed reflections whole, and a row of terrace houses where curtains twitched but no one ever admitted to seeing anything. And somewhere along that stretch, her voicemail picked up the sound of breathing that wasn't hers, slow and close, like someone leaning in to share a secret they'd rehearsed. And then the line went dead, not dropped, not crackled out, just ended, as if a finger had pressed a button with deliberate care. The voicemail was replayed so many times that the sound of breathing began to feel unreal. Like white noise, you start to hear patterns in, and yet each time they listened, the closeness of it crawled under the skin. The sense that whoever was on the other end of that line wasn't rushing, wasn't panicking, but lingering in the moment, savoring the quiet, and in that space between breaths, there was a weight that suggested patience, the kind of patience that only comes from someone who believes time is on their side. When police traced her last signal to the petrol station, the cashier remembered a woman standing by the payphone, even though no one used it anymore. Soaked through eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the forecourt, like she was watching something approach. And he remembered the way she flinched when a car door slammed nearby, the way she mouthed sorry to no one in particular, and then walked out of frame, leaving behind a thin trail of water that disappeared as quickly as it had formed. The cashier's memory sharpened with every retelling, details rearranging themselves in his mind until he couldn't be sure what he'd actually seen and what he'd filled in afterward. But one thing stayed fixed. The look on her face, not fear exactly, but the strained politeness of someone trying not to draw attention to the fact that something feels wrong. The expression people wear when they sense danger but don't yet have permission, even from themselves, to name it out loud. In the days that followed, her room stayed exactly as she'd left it, bed unmade, a mug ringed with tea cooling into a brown halo on the nightstand, a scrap of paper on the floor with a phone number, written and crossed out 3 times, and her mother kept replaying Lisa's last voicemail, straining to hear meaning in the silence between breaths, convinced that if she listened hard enough, she could hear her daughter trying to say the things she'd always swallowed down in her room. The quiet pressed down heavier than any noise could have, the absence of her movements louder than footsteps, and the ordinary clutter of living took on a strange gravity, as if every object had been promoted to evidence simply by surviving her disappearance. Each one a small reminder that people don't vanish in a single dramatic moment, but leave behind a trail of unfinished gestures, of cups not washed, messages not sent, doors not fully closed. People started to talk about a man in a dark jacket, seen near the canal, about a white van idling too long at the curb, about a local who'd been odd since his wife left, and every rumor landed like a stone in water, rippling outward until no one could remember where it started, while the town wrapped itself in the comfort of maybe, anything that kept the truth at a distance. The rumors spread with the speed of discomfort, not because anyone believed them fully, but because repeating them gave shape to fear, and fear without shape is harder to sit with, so faces blurred together. In people's minds, coats and vans and silhouettes becoming interchangeable symbols of threat, while the real weight of not knowing settled into the cracks of everyday life, into the pauses in conversation, into the way doors were locked a little earlier each night. There was one detail that didn't fit, a small, ugly thing that sat wrong. In the back of the mind, Lisa's phone had been found 2 days later in a skip behind the petrol station, wiped clean, no fingerprints, no smudges, no rainwater inside, as if it had been placed there carefully after everything else had already happened. And when they pulled the SIM, the last outgoing call wasn't to her mum, or her best friend, or the ex everyone thought she was scared of, but to a number registered to the landline of her own flat. The phone's cleanliness was what unsettled investigators the most, the absence of prints louder than any evidence they could have found, because it suggested intention, a carefulness that didn't match the chaos of disappearance. An intention implies presence. Someone still there after the moment everyone wanted to believe was the end. Someone who had the time to consider what should remain and what should be erased. At first, they thought it was a glitch, some strange loop in the network, but then they checked the timestamp, and the call had been made at 2:43 a.m., 2 minutes after the CCTV caught her stepping into the light. 2 minutes after she mouthed those unheard words, and 2 minutes before her phone went silent forever. And the only person who could have answered that landline at that hour was Lisa herself, because she lived alone and her flat was locked. From the inside, when they broke the door down, the locked flat became its own kind of accusation. A silent room insisting on an impossible timeline, and officers moved through it with the uneasy feeling of trespassing on a moment that shouldn't exist. The air stale with the after-image of a life paused mid-breath, while the unanswered call echoed in their minds, looping back on itself like a question that refused to accept the logic of the world it was asked in. When they finally listened to the recording pulled from the line, there was no voice, just the faint sound of rain against glass and the slow, uneven breathing they'd heard before, closer this time. Intimate in a way that made the room feel smaller, and then a soft click, like a phone being set gently back on its cradle. And that's when they understood that the call wasn't a mistake or a glitch at all. It was a mirror being held up to. A moment that had already passed, a final echo from a place she couldn't answer from anymore. Some nights, when the rain comes down just right, the petrol station camera still flickers, and people swear the light looks dimmer than it used to, like it's remembering something it shouldn't have to remember. And if you stand there long enough, listening to the hum of electricity and the empty space where a voice should be, you start to wonder how many calls go through to no one at all. And maybe that's what unsettles people the most about nights like this. Not the idea that something terrible can happen in the dark, but that the dark can hold on to echoes, replaying fragments of fear long after the person who felt them is gone, turning ordinary places into quiet witnesses that never speak, only flicker and hum and wait for the next passerby to step into the light.